Hi, everyone. Tanya Hertz here. I am going to talk to you a little bit tonight about leadership, actually a little bit more about leadership. We've been covering several topics within that overarching topic of leadership. And right now we're going to look at some of the metrics that we use in organizations to gauge efficacy of our leaders, to see if they're effective leaders or not. We're going to look primarily at the tools that we use for the leaders themselves, and then the behaviors and the skills that we're trying to change. And remember, when we're addressing effectiveness and when we're trying to provide feedback to leaders, we always want to give that feedback in a way that's it's actionable, right? So that said, we don't want to necessarily tell a leader something like, well, you'd be a better leader if your personality was X, Y, or Z. That may or may not be true, but it's difficult to change one's personality. When you break that down into very specific behaviors, that's something that can be addressed. So that's more of a SMART goal. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen with you. And we'll get started right away on the slides and where we left off. Perfect. So competency models are the behaviors, or a description of the behaviors rather, and the skills that are needed for organizational success. And all organizational competency models fall within one of four major categories. Now, different organizations are going to have different models for different levels of management, different positions in the company. They still fall within those four overarching categories. Intrapersonal skills. So intra is within ourselves, adapting to stress, setting goals. And these are skills that don't involve interacting with others. Intrapersonal, these are the most difficult to change. Interpersonal skills, so between people, these are things like communicating, interacting with one another. And these are easier skills to change. Now, leadership skills are skills that are concerned with building teams, managing teams, getting results from other people, motivating other people. And these are even easier to develop than the aforementioned two. And then the final model or category is business skill. And these are the things that you're learning in your bachelor's programs and MBA programs. And these are often the easiest of all four of the different categories to actually change. And these include things like strategic thinking. It includes things like analyzing issues, making decisions, finance, accounting, marketing, all the things that you're learning, the codifiable type things at university. All right, easiest of the four to change. So this is an example here of a competency model in an organization where every leader is ranked on a scale, and they are ranked by competency, and every level of management in an organization is going to have a different competency model that they'll use for gauging the effectiveness of that leader, saying whether that leader is a good leader or a bad leader. All right, so the leadership pipeline model. This shows where leaders should be spending their time, what they should be focusing on, and what they should be letting go. So it shows what behaviors they need to exhibit, what challenges they're likely to face at different organizational levels. And it really is a type of roadmap for people who want to chart where they are and where they're going to be. And it's really useful in organization when you're promoting people into leadership positions. And one of those kind of frameworks that stays the same regardless of whether or not somebody changes positions in the organization. All right, so here's an excerpt from a leadership pipeline, and it describes the competencies that the leader needs to gain. It describes the timeline. It describes the values for every level of organization. And it's useful because it's often really difficult for people to understand that there's totally different skills needed for different levels in a company. You know, you might be a really excellent salesperson or a really excellent mid-level manager. But if you don't realize that you need to learn to delegate, and you need to learn how to motivate others, you're never going to move up in the company. All right. So we focus on leadership in this class quite a bit, or in the rec program at Miramar and at SDSU, on leadership in companies. But it's also important to realize that community leadership is also very important, and it requires some similar skills, but then a lot of skills that are also different. And without focusing on it as a separate entity, we may not address this. So when we're talking about community leadership, this is the process of building a team of volunteers, typically, to accomplish an important community outcome or social, embark on some sort of social change. Now, community leaders typically will lack the power position. They typically have fewer resources. They typically lack reward power. So it can be hard to be a leader in the community. And there are 3 competencies that are critical to driving community change efforts, and successfully. And the thing about the 3 competencies is they need to be developed and fulfilled simultaneously. So framing, building social capital, and mobilization are the 3 competencies that are required to be effective as a community leader. And that's framing is the ability to frame problems, to recognize, to define the problems and the opportunities within those problems. So framing is, in essence, getting other people to see the problem and the solution. Entrepreneurs are good at framing, right? They're good at recognizing problems and solutions to those problems. All right, building social capital. And this is the process by which we develop and maintain our relationships with others. And in leadership, in business, and particularly in community leadership, it is not who you know. No, I take that back. It's not what you know, but who you know. It is not what you know, but who you know. Right? You have to have a very strong and robust and extensive and diverse, deep network in order to be effective. You need to be able to bring the right people at the right time if you want things to happen. And I'd say, out of personal experience, this is the #1 skill set that will make or break a leader. And it's one of the ways that we can really benefit from our education and making those connections and bringing them with us moving forward. All right, finally is mobilization, the final category, and that's the ability to engage a critical mass of people to take action to achieve an outcome. And this is the process of getting all the results together to get things done, the people, the equipment, the facilities, the everything, and moving, right? And mobilization is strategic. It needs to be planned. It needs to be purposeful. It's really, this is the nuts and bolts. Can you actually get things done? Who cares about what you can talk about? When push comes to shove, can you make things happen? Right? All right. So here we go. The components of leadership, of community leadership, rather. And it shows this figure, the 3 working, 3 things that need to be working together, the 3 components that need to be working together in order to be successful at a project. Or, your project's going to fail, your bond isn't going to get it passed, you're not going to get a new park built or a new incubator open, or your social movement is going to stagnate and die on the floor, right? So imagine you want to get, let's say what kind of social change do you, let's say you want to impeach the president, or let's say, I don't know, let's say something maybe even more challenging, since we just had a couple impeachments in a row. Let's say you want to get gun control included on the next ballot. What do you need to do for each of these separate components? What would you need to have happen? And do you see how you would have to have all of these happening simultaneously in order for that change to change to go into effect? All right. So another tool that we use, another instrument that we use to give leaders feedback and to gauge efficacy is the 360 Multirater feedback instrument. And the 360 comes from the 360-degree views, and that's where the feedback comes from, right? It comes from all around you. So 360, think of all around you. It's important as leaders that we don't just look in the mirror when we are assessing our performance as leaders, but that we bring in impact from all interested, necessary parties, right? This is actually a huge industry right now, right? There's, I think it's something like $200 million industry is assessing leader behaviors using multi-rater feedbacks. Right? People want to know in organizations how well their leaders are performing. All right. So the key to high observer ratings is really to develop a broad set of leadership skills to really help your teams in the organization to accomplish their goals. And research shows that it's possible to change others' perceptions of a leader's skills over time, but that using a 360-degree feedback process is not enough typically. Leaders also need to set developmental goals. They need to commit to a development plan. And the reason they need to do that is because that's how you actually affect skills and improving skills. So remember I said we're looking in this section at all of the different tools that we can use to gauge our success as leaders. But once we recognize that there's a problem, it's all about the journal, right? Creating a development plan first, and then a journal, and then addressing whatever that critical need was, so that you can overcome whatever deficit that you have. Again, don't work on more than 2 to 3 big planning goals at one time if you want to be successful as a leader, but you should at all times be working on anywhere from 1 to 3 different strategic goals for improving your leadership. I'm always working on them. I have my journals that I write in, and I get the feedback from all around, right? From my subordinates, from my mentors, from those that work with me, those that work for me. All right, so I was going to say, about 360. I wanted to add about 360 in terms of race and culture. They do race, culture, gender. They all play a part in whether or not these 360 multi-raters are actually giving you the most accurate and useful information. So, research does show that there's correlation between accuracy and utility of the process in correlation to in correlation to race and gender, and like I said, culture. So for example, like in Japan and even in rural parts of the United States, people don't believe that followers should be giving their leaders feedback. And we see that Blacks tend to give higher ratings to other Blacks, but that, when they're rating themselves, they typically actually rate themselves lower. And that may have something to do with feelings of inadequacy or, unnecessarily, but nonetheless, imposter syndrome, things like this. So, another thing that we see too is that white bosses tend to give white employees significantly higher ratings than they do to Blacks or to other racial minorities. And so these findings are implying that Black leaders are less likely to advance because 80 to 90% of salary, bonuses, promotion, all of these are based solely on these performance metrics, and solely by the bosses, which that's problematic if they're making unfair assessments. So it's important when you're building these out, the 360 feedback should be built around competency models and not used for performance ratings because of those biases that are inherently there. There are other things that you can do to to overcome those stereotypes. All right. So this figure actually shows exactly who's questioned for the feedback. So it comes from anyone who has contact with the leader, right? Most organizations use these tools. And so you're going to be, at some point in your career, you're going to use a 360 rater feedback if you haven't already. And this is what it looks like. Yeah. All right. So here's an example of where the person, him or herself, rates herself, and she also rates her manager and others on several competencies that are pulled from whichever competency model is used by the organization. And so part of that 360 is you, right? You yourself. So we know that leaders can benefit from leadership behavior research in many different ways, and it's helped us to identify factors that can cause really managers with a lot of potential to fail miserably. And we can use the leadership grid, we can use the pipeline model, the competency models to gauge whether or not we're being effective as leaders. And then remember, it all goes back at the end to the development planning process, and after we identify those skill deficits, then to improve them, right? To start working on getting better. All right, so I'm going to stop that there and have a good one.